Living with COVID, the Prime Minister sets out his plan for England, scrapping the legal requirement to self-isolate from Thursday. Boris Johnson says it's time to move from government restrictions to personal responsibility.
Let us learn to live with this virus and continue protecting ourselves and others without restricting our freedoms.
Free universal testing will be scrapped from April the 1st, even if you have symptoms. The Labour leader says it's a mistake.
Free tests can't continue forever, but if you're 2-1 up
over 75s and the most vulnerable from the spring, we'll get the latest reaction to the changes. Also tonight, the third named storm in a week, Franklin, batters parts of the UK with floods, heavy rain and strong winds.
Here in Ironbridge, the flood defences are up. Some people have been told to leave their homes because the water levels here are dangerously high, and we're told they're still rising.
Closer to confrontation, President Putin will decide today whether to recognise two breakaway republics within Ukraine as independent. And tributes are paid after the death of Jamal Edwards, the musical entrepreneur who helped launch the careers of artists such as Dave and Ed Sheeran.
And coming up in sport on the BBC News channel, with athletes now heading home, what lessons can be learnt for Team GB after a frustrating Winter Olympics in Beijing?
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. The Prime Minister has announced that all coronavirus restrictions will be lifted in England, hailing what he called a move from government restrictions to personal responsibility. As part of the plans to live with COVID, the legal requirement to self-isolate will be lifted by Thursday, but people will still be encouraged to stay at home if they test positive until the 1st of April. The universal testing programme will also end from April the 1st, even for people with symptoms. Instead, free testing will be available only to the most vulnerable. And an additional booster dose will be offered to all over 75s and the most vulnerable over 12s from the spring, 6 months after their last jab. In a moment, we'll look at the data driving the decision and the economic impact. But first, our political editor Laura Koonsberg reports on the Prime Minister's announcement. And a warning, her report contains some flashing images.
Now and then, the empty streets and silence of early lockdown. Today, millions of workers heading back to their desks, replacing the ghosts of empty offices before. The first vaccine, a modern miracle. Jabs in almost every arm now.
Good evening.
A Prime Minister back then with an emergency instruction.
You must stay at home.
Today, the laws which governed our behaviour swept away.
We will remove all remaining
So from this Thursday, if you test positive in England, it won't be law to stay at home. From April, only the most vulnerable will get free COVID tests, but there'll be another booster vaccine for the elderly and those at risk.
Restrictions pose a heavy toll on our economy, our society, our mental well-being and on the life chances of our children. And Mr. Speaker, it is time that we got our confidence back. We don't need laws to compel people to be considerate to others. So let us learn to live with this virus and continue protecting ourselves and others without restricting our freedoms.
Minister, is it too soon to be relaxing restrictions?
Nothing in this pandemic's been straightforward. Not the decision to relax the restrictions, nor what to leave behind. Ministers turned up for a meeting to finalise the details this morning.
Why was the Cabinet meeting cancelled, Minister?
But within minutes, we're out again.
Was Cabinet cancelled?
The meeting suddenly cancelled as the Treasury and the Department of Health haggled over just how much to keep spending on COVID tests. Ammunition for the opposition.
All we've got today is yet more chaos and disarray. Not enough to prepare us for the new variants which may yet develop. An approach which seems to think that living with COVID means simply ignoring it. This morning he couldn't even persuade his own health secretary to agree the plan.
Northern Ireland's already scrapped its legal restrictions, but Scotland and Wales are sticking for now, and there's concern about the Prime Minister's moves.
We know this reckless statement flies in the face of advice from scientists and the World Health Organization. That's because this statement is not about protecting the public. It's about the Prime Minister scrambling to save his own skin.
First and foremost, removing the legal rules will make many practical differences. But it's also the end of a strange and stressful era, in England at least, when politicians have passed laws that dictated so many aspects of our lives. For Boris Johnson, it is in a way a welcome relief to satisfy those in his party who believe the restrictions have been in place for too long and have been too tight. But the pandemic is not over, and loosening up is not without risk.
I'm here.
It's still present, even in Buckingham Palace, where the 95-year-old Queen herself has mild symptoms. Another stop on this agonising national journey, that rarest of moments where every single one of us has been affected. Yet while the laws are loosening, the pandemic has not yet gone and is certainly not forgotten. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, the end to all remaining COVID legal restrictions in England has prompted a mixed reaction from scientists and the public, and some concern from those who are clinically vulnerable. But what does the data say about the current state of the pandemic? Is this the right move at the right time? Our health editor, Hugh Pym, reports from Eastbourne.
Taking a new tack and hoping for calmer waters, the government's new approach on COVID has been well signalled, and members of Eastbourne and District Model Yacht Club have thought what it means for them. Roger is in his 80s, a potentially vulnerable age, but he's happy for the next step to be taken.
We look as though we're on the sunny side of the mountain now, aren't we?
So do you think it's right just to press on without restrictions?
Without restrictions, yes. Very definitely.
Those here aged 75 and over may be further reassured by news they'll be eligible for a fourth vaccine dose. There's little disagreement over the need to open up at some stage and end legal restrictions, but it's a question of timing. Jonathan is a GP at a large practice in Eastbourne. There are high virus case rates in the area, and he's anxious about what the ending of isolation rules might mean for patients.
If it were to carry on till Easter, maybe that would be a bit better. You know, we've been trying very hard to keep people out of the building when they're carrying an infection. They say there's no rules about isolation. They want to come and see us, which is going to make life a little bit more difficult.
His concerns are echoed by Linda.
There's still a lot of COVID about. I've got 3 members of my family that have got it.
Would you feel more comfortable if this compulsory isolation stayed then for the time being?
Just to the spring.
So what does the science suggest? COVID hospital admissions have been falling and new antiviral drugs have come on stream. There's much higher immunity thanks to previous infections and vaccination. COVID case rates relative to the population have been falling in the UK. They're lower than, for example, Germany and Italy, but above countries like the United States and Canada.
We still have high levels of infection in the community, but far lower levels of admissions to hospital, and mortality is low. So I think you can't do it indefinitely. You have to lift restrictions at some point. But what we need to do is recognise that people's behaviour, this is not a free ticket just to go back and not worry about the virus at all.
PCR testing sites will be wound down in England and free lateral flow tests cut back. That is proving more contentious. Zoe is a secondary school teacher. She thinks the relaxation of isolation rules may be good for her children and other pupils without symptoms, but not necessarily everyone.
For the sake of getting people back to work, etc., I think it's very good. But we do have vulnerable members of staff in our school, and I just think they may feel very differently about it to how I do.
Moving on from restrictions at this centre My Skate World and in the wider community, they'll still have to learn to live with COVID. Hugh Pym, BBC News, Eastbourne.
Many business leaders, particularly in hospitality, have been calling for a return to normality as soon as possible. But unions are warning that removing the legal requirement to self-isolate puts workers in an impossible position. So what effect will today's announcement have on business and the economy? Here's our business editor, Simon Jack.
The darkest days of lockdown seem a distant memory. The economy has bounced back, but changes to the way we live and work are still with us. And for this salon in Manchester's suburb Monton, people working from home, spending more time in the neighbourhood, means life is looking good.
I'd say that business has been better than ever. I think with people working from home, that the schedule's a bit more flexible. We've had a big influx of new clients as well because of that.
People spending more time and money here means less of both for city centre businesses like Jen's Distillery and Bar. Her Friday night takings are still 25% lower than pre-pandemic.
We, the whole sector, have had a really tough 24 months. It's been, it's been quite bruising. So I'd like to think that, over the coming years, we do start to see offices and businesses getting everyone back into their workplaces.
Is this a game changer?
Honestly, for us, I don't think so. I don't see this suddenly bringing an influx of people back to city centres. I do think it will be more organic and it will be more gradual.
You can see the political and economic attraction of trying to choose a moment to draw a line under COVID's influence on all our lives, dial down the billions spent on universal free testing, get back to normal. But normal has changed. Those who can work from home want to keep doing it, even demand to keep doing it, and that could have big implications for the people who run our biggest cities. Manchester train and tram use is down a quarter compared to pre-pandemic levels, threatening the viability of some services.
The truth is the pandemic is going to leave a mark. It's going to leave a mark on public transport. It isn't going to be able to get straight back to what it was, and that's why the government will have to step in and support public transport as cities recover.
Or what? Or what will happen?
Or we will see the loss of services, and we are already hearing that operators are getting ready to reduce the frequency of services, cut some altogether, 30 services at risk in Greater Manchester.
Today's measures were described as a significant step towards normality by the business group the CBI, but few think it will be business as usual anytime soon, if ever. Simon Jack, BBC News, Manchester.
The plans announced today are for England. In a moment, we'll hear from our correspondents Hal Griffith and Emma Vardy in Wales and Northern Ireland. But first, Alexandra Mackenzie explains how Scotland is approaching the next phase of the pandemic.
Here in Scotland, the First Minister will outline her plan on living with COVID in the Scottish Parliament tomorrow. She said there'll be some optimism as we move to a new phase in the pandemic. But ahead of that, she said that anyone who tests positive with COVID should self-isolate. She also disagrees with any sudden change to testing arrangements. She would prefer a slower move to a more targeted approach. Here in Scotland, you must wear a face covering in indoor public places, and also vaccine passports are required in places like nightclubs and other large gatherings.
In Wales, the rules on self-isolation remain. There is a review due next month, but for now, if you test positive for COVID here, you have to self-isolate for at least 5 days. That may now cause confusion for people who have to cross the border with England for work. Masks remain mandatory in shops and on public transport and in healthcare until the end of this month. But the Welsh Government's biggest concern is that change on testing. They say bringing it to an end is premature and reckless. They had lobbied alongside Scotland and Northern Ireland to keep a testing structure in place until at least the end of June.
In Northern Ireland, the remaining COVID restrictions like face masks and vaccine passports were dropped from being legal requirements last week, while self-isolation rules remain. But ending COVID restrictions here wasn't straightforward. Because of the collapse in the power-sharing executive at Stormont, there's no First and Deputy First Ministers here to sign off on big decisions. Instead, Northern Ireland's Health Minister, Robin Swan, had to get the backing of individual ministers instead. And Robin Swan has also signed that letter from the devolved nations setting out their concerns as England plans to end isolation rules. It's calling urgently for more information on the scale of services that will remain to ensure all 4 nations stay prepared for any potential future waves of the virus.
Let's talk now to our medical editor, Fergus Welsh. So, Fergus, a lot of changes announced for England today. Tell us more about this booster jab. I mean, for some, it's going to be their 5th jab.
Yeah, the UK is one of the first countries in the world to offer this second booster. Germany is offering it to the over 70s. Israel has already started rolling it out to all adults. Now, it will be a 4th dose for the over 75s, about 7 million people there. But it'll be a 5th dose, as you say, to about 500,000 immunosuppressed people. Now, it's precautionary. It's intended to tide over the most vulnerable until the autumn, when there'll be another booster for a much wider group of people, though exactly how many adults that will be is unclear. Now, that should at some point settle down into either an annual booster for COVID along with the flu jab, or perhaps one every 2 years. But that depends on COVID, and it also depends on how long the protection lasts from those jabs.
And casting our mind back 2 years now, almost 2 years, the Prime Minister originally talked of turning the tide on this virus in 12 weeks. Here we are, as you say, almost 2 years on, lifting legal restrictions in England. How significant is this moment?
It is significant, but the society and individual threat from COVID has dropped dramatically. Now, it's largely down to highly effective vaccines, but also tens of millions of us have now come into contact with the virus and had our immunity topped up there. But we also have these highly effective antiviral pills that can stop COVID in its tracks. But it's taken a terrible toll. Nearly 750,000 hospital admissions from COVID in the past 2 years. It will continue to pose a danger, but COVID should never again pose a threat to overwhelm the NHS.
Fergus, thank you. Time has just gone 6:15. Our top story this evening. Living with COVID, the Prime Minister sets out his plan for England, scrapping the legal requirement to self-isolate from Thursday. And coming up, with parts of the UK battered by Storm Franklin, we'll bring you the latest on the current situation and the weather to come.
And coming up on Sports Day on the BBC News channel, after failing to play in Australia over his vaccine status, Novak Djokovic returns to action for the first time this year. We'll have the latest from the Dubai Tennis Championships.
Storm Franklin, the 3rd named storm in a week, has brought heavy rain and strong winds to many parts of the UK. Severe flooding in Northern Ireland, Yorkshire and Manchester have forced people to leave their homes for safety. There are more than 130 flood warnings across England, Scotland and Wales, and danger to life alerts were issued in Bewdley and Ironbridge just in the last few hours. Danny Savage reports.
It's been a very wet weekend. Rivers across the UK have burst their banks and roads have been flooded. At Ironbridge in Shropshire, a severe flood warning is now in place for the River Severn. This is where the Environment Agency is most worried about.
Our temporary barriers are in place and they will obviously do what they can to protect the community, but we are expecting potentially seeing those barriers becoming overtopped, and hence why the severe flood warning has been issued.
Heavy rain across northern England meant these floodgates had to be opened in Manchester. It meant the local golf course disappeared underwater, but it saved homes from flooding.
We didn't get a great deal of sleep because we kept on checking the app, monitoring the water levels. A little bit concerning, but yeah, feels like we're over the worst of it now.
A few miles away, a lorry caught fire after strong winds blew it into a bridge on the M6 near Wigan. The driver escaped unhurt, but there were long rush hour delays. A trip along the River Wharfe in North Yorkshire revealed numerous floods. This is the High Street in Tadcaster. The water was pretty deep.
Properties in Wharfe Bank Terrace that are lived in, they've had to evacuate. A guy on the other side of the bridge climbed down a ladder to get out of his flat. It's very disappointing for the town. You know, nobody wants to run a business when this happens to it every few years, do they?
Tadcaster Albion are now just one of many football clubs who won't be playing at home for a while. In the next village along, the bridge across the river was closed after showing signs that floodwater was making it move.
This is the River Wharfe at Boston Spa, and the main bridge linking the two halves of the community has had to be closed because a crack has appeared in it. And that means, for people living here, a 7-mile diversion to get from one side now to the other.
In South Yorkshire, Rotherham railway station looked as though it was built for boats rather than trains. Storm Franklin rattled through Northern Ireland first with gusts of nearly 80 miles per hour. Wales was hit too. This was Llandinam in Powys, where homes were flooded. And York has a new tourist attraction, just one place where the water is still rising. The problems from this conveyor belt of storms aren't over. Danny Savage, BBC News.
Our correspondent Andrew Plant is in Ironbridge. Andrew, we can see the water there behind you and people are already having to evacuate.
Yeah, they have just finished putting up the flood barriers here in Ironbridge. They go up a couple of times a year, actually, but this time does feel a bit different. The people living behind those barriers have been told they should leave their homes. Those living nearby have been told it would be a good idea to have a bag packed just in case they have to go in a hurry. And the fear is, of course, that the water will get so high it comes over those barriers. Even though we're losing the light here, hopefully you can just see how swollen the River Severn is right now. We've been upriver, actually, about half an hour upriver earlier today, and there are homes there beginning to flood and people leaving. And there is a delayed reaction on this. All the extra water we're seeing here essentially fell on the Welsh hills over the weekend. It takes 48 hours for the effects of that to be seen. And what that means really is that this water hasn't finished rising. In fact, we're told it could be this time tomorrow before it peaks. And what that means is there will be a very nervous evening and anxious night for the people here and everyone living alongside this river.
Andrew in Ironbridge, thank you. And just in the last couple of minutes, President Putin has announced he intends to recognise as independent the two breakaway regions of Ukraine controlled by Russian-backed separatists, Donetsk and Luhansk. It follows a unanimous vote to do so at a rare gathering of his Security Council. It would mark a significant escalation of hostilities, given that the two so-called republics could potentially request Russian military assistance to help them fight Ukrainian government forces. Russia is evacuating people from the area over the border into Rostov. Our correspondent Caroline Davis reports from there.
He set the stage, but this was a new level of political theatre from President Putin. Addressing the Russian Security Council, he said, "We will decide what happens next." One by one, his officials told him he must recognise the areas of Ukraine seized by separatist rebels.
The decision will be made today.
If Russia does recognise the separatist areas, it will end the Minsk ceasefire agreements, break international law, likely lead to sanctions and could escalate the conflict in Ukraine. For weeks, Russia has said that its military drills are just war games. The West has repeatedly warned that Russia's military is about to launch something far more real.
My urgent appeal to the Russian government: come back to the negotiating table. It is in their hands. We are at the table every hour, every minute. We are waiting for them so that together we can ensure peace and security in Ukraine.
While the West worries that Russia will attack Ukraine, Russian state media broadcast accusations that Ukraine is planning to attack separatist areas, showing images of shelling damage. Ukraine and the West have strongly denied this, and the fear is that this is Russia's way of justifying an intervention. As the political noise and confusion gets louder, some are caught in the middle. Women, children and the elderly were told to evacuate from separatist areas. Some, like Ekaterina and 6-month-old Miroslav, found shelter in a sports hall for a night.
We are so tired. We want to sleep, to take shower, the basic things for a person and a child.
Others are already on the move, sent to the station and put on trains. So this is the third coachload of families we've seen getting off here in the course of the last 10 minutes. And many on board didn't know where they were going, but we've just been told by the authorities that they're being taken to a city that's just to the east of Moscow, which is more than 1,000 kilometres away from here. Some worry that if they were expected to come back soon, they wouldn't be sent so far. They, like much of the world, can only guess at the Kremlin's endgame. But some have a sense of foreboding that the brinkmanship has reached a fever pitch. Caroline Davis, BBC News, Taganrog.
Well, let's talk to our Moscow correspondent, Steve Rosenberg, who's in Moscow for us this evening. And Steve, just in the last few minutes, President Putin has confirmed that he does intend to recognise these two breakaway areas within Ukraine as independent. This looks like a significant escalation, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it certainly would be. I mean, first of all, it would basically kill off the internationally recognised peace process that's been going on in eastern Ukraine for the last few years, which hasn't made much progress. But just a few days ago, President Putin recommitted himself to that peace process. It could also give a pretext to Russian forces, or to move Russian forces openly into the Donbass, and possibly not only into areas under rebel control, but further still. And that would trigger almost certainly Western sanctions. So this would be a major development. But what a piece of theatre we witnessed in the Kremlin today. Sitting there all alone at this table, almost like a modern-day Tsar, summoning all his chiefs to give their opinion. He sat there tapping his fingers impatiently, weighing.
Some of today's other news. An Ofsted report commissioned following the death of 6-year-old Arthur Labinio Hughes, who was killed by his father and stepmother in 2020, has concluded that a significant number of vulnerable children remain at risk in Solihull. The document highlighted the lack of communication between different agencies as one of the causes. Solihull Council says it's already begun work to improve its services. Industrial action across some UK universities is continuing today after unions and employers failed to reach an agreement. The University and College Union said strike action has now spread to 68 institutions, with lecturers walking out in disputes over pay, conditions and pensions. There have been tearful reunions as most of Australia has reopened up to international travel for the first time in almost 2 years. People who are fully vaccinated are now allowed to enter the country without having to quarantine, but Western Australia will remain closed until March. Musicians, actors and the royal family have paid tribute to the musical entrepreneur Jamal Edwards, who's died suddenly at the age of 31. He's been credited with helping to launch a string of music careers, including those of Ed Sheeran, Dave and Jessie J. Our music correspondent Mark Savage looks back at his life.
Smoky Boss TV.
We got Smoky Boss. We got. This is how Jamal Edwards started a media empire. A grainy clip filmed on a £20 mobile phone in the middle of a school trip. He created the SBTV channel on YouTube in 2006, frustrated that he couldn't find the music that he loved online.
Everyone in my area was an MC, and I remember I was just sitting there and I was thinking, why can't I find these online? And if they were online, it was just bad quality versions. So I thought, all right, cool. I'm going to try and film the people that are in my area and upload it to YouTube.
The punchline king. Before long, SBTV had become the go-to place for British rap. It gave early exposure to artists like Stormzy, Dave and Ed Sheeran. The channel played a key role in making grime go mainstream and earned Jamal Edwards an MBE at the age of 24. He put his success to good use, funding youth groups for underprivileged children and raising awareness of mental health. Musicians and DJs have remembered him as an inspiration.
If I had one word to describe Jamal, it'd be selfless. With Jamal, I never had to question what he was after or his intentions, because I know he just wanted everyone to be great.
I don't know anybody that has a bad word to say about Jamal. And I'm just really glad he got his flowers when he was alive, because one thing he can know, rest assured, that he was a legend, and we all knew that, and his legacy really will live on.
In Acton, where he was raised, fans and friends have been leaving flowers and messages of tribute.
He was the hero of Acton. He was the guy who showed you could make it out without being a drug dealer, without getting involved in crime and everything.
Jamal was the guy that showed kids from low-income households that you are not limited to what your grades might tell you.
My abiding memory of him would be his vision, how he looked ahead and how he knew what to do.
Jamal Edwards' impact on music cannot be overestimated. Although he died young, he will be remembered with his own words. The goal isn't to live forever. The goal is to create something that will.
Jamal Edwards, who's died at the age of 31. Right, let's take a look at the weather. Sarah Keith Lucas is here. So have we seen the back of the worst of it yet?
We have for now, Fiona. Yes, Storm Franklin has now cleared away. So we're not expecting another named storm through the rest of this week. But what we are expecting is some more wet and windy weather. I think the wind's less of a problem, but more rain for areas that could really do without it. We've still got flood warnings in force across England and Wales, one for Scotland too, and 2 severe flood warnings for the River Severn. This is the picture at the moment in Worcester. So we have got more rain arriving through the course of tonight into tomorrow. That's all courtesy of this approaching weather front here. Meanwhile, Storm Franklin has cleared off towards the east, so a bit of a quieter spell of weather at the moment in between weather systems. So weather for much of tonight, but during the second half of the night the cloud increases from the west and we see this next band of heavy rain arriving across Northern Ireland and northwest Scotland by the morning. The lowest temperatures tonight will be in the east, where we keep those clearest skies and light winds for longest. But tomorrow morning they're dominated by this weather system that's going to bring yet more rain to some of those areas that are already seeing that intense flooding. So the rain clears away from Scotland and Northern Ireland fairly quickly tomorrow, just pushing eastwards across England and Wales, tending to fizzle out by the time it reaches southeast England. By the afternoon we're all in some slightly drier weather, so sunny spells and a few showers around too, and temperatures ranging between only 5 in Stornoway to around 13 in London. So as we move through Tuesday night and then on into Wednesday, a bit of a quieter spell once again because we've got high pressure sitting to the south. Another weather front does move in on Wednesday, bringing some rain to Northern Ireland and Scotland, some snow even on top of the mountains. But thankfully for England and Wales, we're looking at a drier spell of weather. Still quite breezy, but certainly not those strong damaging winds that we've seen over recent days. And temperatures around about 7 to 11 degrees. It does look like Thursday brings us another fairly breezy, cooler, showery sort of day. But you'll be pleased to hear that things are turning drier by Friday. But all those warnings, of course, Fiona, can be found on our website.
Sarah, thanks very much. And that's all from the BBC News at 6. It's goodbye from me. And on BBC One, we can join the BBC's news teams where you are. Bye.